There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us for this early morning PopCon event, and I think it is an excellent sign for how engaged the party faithful are and how important they see the topic, considering how many of you have come here at 9 o'clock on the third day of conference. So thank you very much for coming along. How do you solve a problem like reform is the question we're discussing today. We've got a fantastic panel. Marco will be here. He's struggling to get through Birmingham traffic and then security, but he's told me he'll be here in about 10 minutes, so we will have a full panel. But I'm delighted to have our fantastic panel here. We first of all, in order that they will be giving opening statements, we have Gareth Bacon, the MP for Orpington and Shadow Minister for London and Shadow Justice Minister. And before he was a Member of Parliament, he was a member of the London Assembly, so someone who I think is very good to speak to us on the effects of reform in London. Next, who will be joining us shortly, we have Marco Longhi, who is the former MP for Dudley North. To my left, if on the panel, if not politically, is Nana Akua, who is a TV presenter and a GB News journalist. And finally is Annunziata Rees-Mogg, my long-suffering colleague at PopCon. She is head of media and former Brexit MEP who has returned to the Conservative fold. So I'm sure she'll be able to talk to us about why she hasn't joined the Reform Party. So just before we begin, I want to set the scene a little bit. Firstly, about the scale of the challenge that the Conservative Party faces. So I'm sure, as we're all very painfully aware, Reform scored more than 19% of the vote in 102 seats. And a little statistic I learned yesterday from one of our previous events is that in 75% of the seats the Conservatives lost to Labour, the Reform vote was greater than the size of the Labour majority. I did a little bit of the back-of-the-envelope calculation this morning, and if the Conservatives could regain about two-thirds of the Reform vote, we would have held an additional 100 seats in the last general election. So, you know, there is a lot. The split on the right is a massive issue. It's a huge issue across the Western world, but and I think the UK is starting to experience it in a way that countries like New Zealand and Australia and Canada have previously. So I'm going to ask Gareth to begin. We're going to give short opening statements. I'll ask a couple of questions from the chair, abusing my authority, at which point I will throw it to you because obviously we're very keen to hear what you guys think. Gareth.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here, although I have to be honest, the subject matter causes me considerable distress because I think the fracturing of the vote on the right is not a good thing for the country at all. And to answer the question directly, how do we solve a problem like reform? To my mind, we just need to be fundamentally conservative again. We hear a lot of debate about moving left, moving right, staying in the centre. You can only win elections from the centre ground. I disagree with that. I think you win the election from the common ground. And I think the common ground, a great lady once said, that the facts of life are conservative. And I would be inclined very strongly to agree with that. And I think it's something that in the latter years, particularly of our time in government, we seem to have forgotten that. We start using the language of the left in order to make ourselves seem like reasonable or indeed nice people. We definitely started to govern from the left. We talked right, but it is indisputable that we were governing on the left. And that allowed a gap to be exploited by Nigel and others to run this betrayal narrative that the Conservatives have betrayed you. They are betraying Brexit, they're betraying the nation. It isn't true, because no acknowledgement, I think, was given to some of the challenges the last government faced, particularly the pandemic and then the inflationary war in Ukraine that followed it. So how do we do it? We're not in government now, so we can't enact legislation that proves how we are conservative. But what we need to do, I think, is restate the case in a positive way for conservatism. And what do I mean by that? I mean strong borders. I mean smaller states, lower taxes, strong law and order. We need to fix or show how we can fix our prisons problem. We need to make the case for free market capitalism again. We seem to have backtracked on that for some reason. We need to stop saying that the state is responsible for fixing every problem in the world, because it isn't, and it can't, and it's very bad at it. And we need to do these things in an unapologetic and positive way, because if we don't do that, then we can't possibly recapture the people that voted for reform. And I would agree with your analysis, Sam, that probably 2/3 of those who voted reform would otherwise have voted Conservative. But there's also a great swathe of people that may have voted Conservative in 2019 who sat on their sofa in 2024, and we need to recapture those people as well. Conservatism at its best is an aspirational, optimising factor that drives people to believe that things can be better in the future. It's an aspiring ideology, and we've abandoned it, and we need to show people that we can recover it and we can make it relevant to their lives, and that is how you solve the problem of reform.
Thank you very much. Nana.
All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Right. That's not very good. Let's try again. Good morning, everybody. People at the back, good morning. Right, well, listen, how do you solve a problem like reform? It depends if you believe that reform is the problem. Okay, because this is the thing. I have voted Labour. I voted for Tony Blair. I even voted Nick Clegg at one point. I know that was madness. But he promised some sort of student money, and that didn't transpire. I have voted Conservative a few times as well. And I have voted reform. So I'm one of those voters that I listen to what they're saying, and if they're saying what I want to hear, then I will vote for them. And I expect Conservatives to control immigration. Did they do that? No. I expect Conservatives to be able to handle gender identity and not allow EDI to flourish under their watch. Did they do that? No. I expect Conservatives to have levels of common sense and rule with policies that are economically efficient. I don't expect them to deal with things like non-dom tax status and take away policies from the Labour Party. So when you say that the Conservatives are in competition with reform, I actually believe they're in competition with the Labour Party, because they literally became the Labour Party. And then let's not talk about the infighting. The infighting. Oh my God. Listen, I wanted desperately to vote Conservative. I wanted to vote Conservative, but I just couldn't. I couldn't. And the problem with the Conservative Party right now is that if they continue all of this division, so what do they have, the 5 families? Can anybody name any more? This is one of the families. Do you remember any of the families?
Well, we're often, as PopCon, accused of being one, and we're not.
Yeah.
We're a grassroots movement. We want to be here for the people in this room,
Right.
not the politicians.
Right, so the bottom line is this. The people also voted for Boris Johnson, and then the infighting meant that Boris Johnson had to go without any credible alternative. I think the real problem for the Conservative Party is not actually reform. I think it is within themselves. They need to return to the conservative values that they are meant to represent. They need to return to common sense values. They need to be united, because I was so upset watching them. I was so upset because I knew that we would end up with a Labour government. And, well, they've not even been in power for like 3 months. And what a disaster they've been. An utter disaster. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. I mean, the latest thing that the Labour Party came out with was, OK, we're going to get rid of coal-fired power stations and our use of coal. And then we're going to make a load of people unemployed. Then after that, we're going to import steel, virgin steel from China to make wind farms and everything else. But then we are energy secure. No, we're not. We're beholden to China now for steel. So I want the Conservative Party to thrive. I think they have a brilliant opportunity now to capitalise on the disaster of the Labour Party. They need to return to conservative values, including things like policies on immigration as well, because it was under their watch that it became, this illegal side of immigration became a nightmare. I want them to return to conservative values. I think if they do that, then there is an opportunity for them and reform to be tight and to potentially be one party. I don't know how realistic that will be, but if I believe the Conservative Party can do it, especially under this Labour government.
Thank you. Thank you, Nana. Annunziata.
Just to make sure that this is the most boring panel you have ever had to sit through, I'm going to agree with both of the previous speakers. What we need to do is not think that reform are the problem, but reform are problem. This is a Conservative Party problem. We weren't Conservative. If you don't do what you say on the tin, people don't trust you. weird that. We failed to deliver on being conservative. Instead of being conservative, we put up taxes to the highest rate since the Second World War. We let immigration run completely out of control. We gave up on every principle and every policy that mattered to the people that voted for us. That's us. These people. All of us here. The reason we're in Birmingham, but the reason that literally millions of people ever voted Conservative, we stopped doing it. Is the problem reform? Or did they just take that empty void we had left? I used to work for Nigel Farage. I was a Brexit Party MEP. It was not the Reform Party. The Reform Party didn't exist back then. I'll tell you one thing about him. He was a hell of a better boss than Theresa May. When I worked for Theresa May, did you hear from her? I was just an activist. I was just one of those people that went round in this lovely, charming English weather that we can hear right now, knocking on doors, soggy leaflets in hand. What did she do for us? She tried to get rid of our democracy. She tried to ignore everything we said. Is that conservative? Not in my view. That's why I moved. I literally gave up the party I had joined in 1984 in order to stand against them. For me, that took a lot. I'm pretty sure for many people in this room who might not want to admit it right now, it took a lot to vote for reform in the most recent election. What's between you and the ballot box is never public. That is part of democracy, and it is as it should be. But I know, going around this conference, that a lot of us actually, I didn't, but a lot of people here did vote reform. And why did we do that? Because they were saying the things we believe in. They were doing the things we wanted our party to do. The things our party should have been doing. I've looked at the statistics. 23% of people who had previously voted Conservative and would have voted Conservative moved to Reform. 7% went to the Lib Dems. We are here, in part, to choose a new leader. Well, how do you do that? Should you go with the 7% or the 23%? I would suggest there is one side that the Conservative Party needs to be clear on. It needs to be clear that we are Conservatives, that we believe in a small state, that we believe in low tax, that we believe in the freedom of the individual, and that each and every one of us is human. I may be wrong, but I think if we don't do that, reform will be the problem.
Thank you very much, Annunziata. I'm going to throw back to Gareth in just a second to address the issues around party infighting. Before I do, I just want to offer apologies to anybody who is, if we're being drowned out a little bit by Steve Bray and his merry men outside. Yeah, it is. Yeah, they've been out there all week.
It's raining, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, shame. But we will try to soldier on and make sure that we can all hear about the future. Gareth, if you'd like to come back.
Yeah, I'd just like to increase the boredom level by agreeing very strongly with Nana's comments around infighting. The first time I voted in a general election was in 1992, and when I was 20, and I remember that election very well. It was an election we were supposed to lose. And I remember marching down to the polling station to proudly vote Conservative, defiantly vote Conservative. Hello, Marco. And I can remember after the exit poll, John Prescott being on television talking about how the Conservatives have lost the trust of the people and they're on their way out and it's the end of Thatcherism and it's not a good thing. And 5 hours later, they had him back on again when it was apparent that we'd won the election with a majority, and the look on his face was absolutely priceless, and I loved it. But within 6 months, we had Black Wednesday, we'd had the ERM ejection, and then we had 4.5 years where the party gradually imploded and MPs piled into each other, the infighting was everywhere, the scandal was everywhere. It starts to sound familiar, doesn't it? Because in 2019, I was elected to Parliament off the back of Boris and Brexit and the anti-Jeremy Corbyn vote, and it felt like we were going to have the opportunity to completely reshape this country in our image. The Conservative decade was about to begin, and then, of course, the pandemic and everything else happened. And then the party descended into infighting with people piling on each other, all this five families nonsense, which really didn't do anybody any favours. And I couldn't believe that some of my parliamentary colleagues couldn't see the damage that this was going to do. If you don't learn the lessons of the past, you will repeat them in the future. Divided parties lose elections, and that is a fact of life. And when you parade your divisions in public, you are just hastening your own doom. The people that thought that what they were doing would help them save their seats sealed their own end. And whatever happens, when we get to the end of this leadership election, we have to unite behind the winner. Because the enemy doesn't wear a blue rosette, the enemy wears a red rosette, and the enemy is about to ruin this country. So it is incumbent on us to unite and then fight our common enemy, not each other. Because otherwise, we are behaving like the Zealots did in Jerusalem in AD 70, when the Roman army had pushed them into the walled-up city, and they decided that was the most opportune moment to start fighting each other and killing each other. And the Roman army just sat there, let them get on with it, and when they were finished, marched over the walls, stepped over their dead bodies and threw them out of Israel for 2,000 years. We don't want to be the Zealots. We want to be the Conservatives, and we want to liberate this country from what is already an appalling government. So unity is the way forward. It's absolutely essential.
Thank you, Gareth. So, Marco, thank you for joining us. I hope you weren't stuck too long in the rain. Obviously, I suppose you are one of the victims of the reform effort. So, I was wondering if you'd like to just give us a few thoughts on how do we solve the problem like reform.
Thank you very much for that, and my apologies for the late arrival. A journey which should only be 20 minutes was an hour and 15. So, yes. A problem like reform, I'm not sure that's worded the correct way. I think the problem is us. And I think that whoever the new leader becomes of this party needs to start with a formal apology to the nation. Because reform exists as a result of the Conservative Party giving it the oxygen to exist. So everything that Gareth has just said, and I quote obviously the tail end of his narrative there, I completely agree with. Gareth and I entered Parliament at the same time, and from what I know of Gareth, we are in the same tent.
We are indeed.
Not just physically, but politically as well. And so for me, it is about uniting behind traditional Conservative values. I very much regret some of the narrative, to use that same word again, that I see coming from people I have a deep respect for. People whom, when I utter these words, say we should avoid lurching to the right. What does that mean? For me, it is about moving along with the common ground, with the people, putting people first. I think some of the things that Gareth and I have witnessed in Parliament is that people have become members of Parliament and they don't realise, they have forgotten that what they should be doing is representing the views of their people rather than imposing their views as MPs on the people they represent. So it's about understanding and emphasising that word representation. Every time the Conservative Party has united behind that common ground and that common theme, we have won elections. Those people who say avoid lurching to the right and think about the cost of living and the environment and all of those things are of course very important. Of course they are. But did we win the 2019 election on the economy? Did we win it on the environment? Did we even win it on the NHS? No, we did not. We won it because we said we would take back control of our borders, our laws, and our money. Who remembers those words? We don't utter them anymore. Now, for the vast majority of people, taking back control of our borders and our laws meant giving real credence to what that word Brexit. And that's what we really need to unite behind. Making Parliament sovereign, completely sovereign. It is one of the reasons, and this isn't a platform, I'm sorry if I do mention it, I am supporting Genric for these very reasons as well, because he's coming out very clearly on the issue that resolves that problem, taking back control of our borders. I wished actually his narrative would encompass all sorts of other, conventions, not just the ECHR, because it is more than just the ECHR. But it is about sovereignty of Parliament. It is about those things that you will hear Bill Cash talk about. And if we think that we're going to reform the ECHR, if we're going to somehow do what Cameron set out to do, which was change the European Union, then we will never, ever, ever get there. And we will carry on letting down. And this is the reason why people did not vote Labour at this election. I lost my seat, ladies and gentlemen, with Labour having fewer votes in my constituency than they did in 2019. And yes, it was reform that took 9,500 votes from me. 6,000 people chose not to vote compared to 2019. But that's not because they suddenly wanted to vote Labour. They just did not want to vote Conservative. They were fed up with us. We broke our promises. We failed. For that, we should start with an apology, together with an acknowledgement of what needs to be addressed moving forward. So that is how we address reform, by addressing ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. So, because of the amount of unanimity on the panel, I'm going to throw a couple of cats among the pigeons and see what happens. First and foremost is I appreciate that everybody says that we should be more conservative. Obviously, I agree. The question is, though, two things. Firstly, we've heard a lot of statements about unity, but it is very clear, even going around conference, and I'm sure many people in this room have seen it, that there is definitely not a huge degree of unity of what conservatism means. And it's all very well for us to say we need to be more conservative and we need to unite around that new conservative vision. But how do we do that when we have a party that perhaps has turned into less of a broad church, into more of a cathedral that's so great that perhaps the party no longer stands for anything? And the second question, and obviously address these in any way that you want, the second question is, how do we manage to deal with with the reality of Reform as a political party? They now have 5 MPs. Is everybody's assumption that if we become more conservative, all of our voters will just naturally come back to us? What about in constituencies where Reform is in second place? Jacob Rees-Mogg on the stage yesterday said that we should stand aside in 98 seats where Reform is in second place to Labour. 53%, we did a PopCon membership panel on Friday, and 53% of our members supported a merger with Reform, and more than 70% supported a closer relationship. So how do we actually bring these people back? Is it just that we become more conservative and it will happen naturally, or do we have to do something about Reform the organisation? And I'll start with Annunziata and move to my right.
Not that I'm on the spot at all. I'm going to be blunt. I don't think unity matters. Sam wanted disagreement on the panel. I'm going to go for disunity. What matters is we know what we are, what we're fighting for, why we're doing it, and who the hell is taking us there. Why do we want to win? Not for power. Power must be ghastly, surely. It's responsibility without answerability. What you want to do is take people with you. You want to explain why it is important that we are free, that we have low tax, that we are Conservative with a small c, that the country, the people of this country come first. It isn't to do with keeping together the 5 tribes. I still don't know who they are. They apparently exist in the press. They are in people's minds. What we need is a leader behind whom we will unite, because in them we see our values. When we see our values, and not just this room, but the country can unite behind that. And that's how we win. That's how we win back power in 5 years' time. I'm afraid it will be that long. From the socialist disaster that we're currently under. We are under that Labour, hard Labour, because we failed to deliver, because we were not Conservative. This is not to do with left and right. In fact, if you look to Europe, if you look to America, the boundaries between left and right have changed so much that it's a nonsensical description. What we need is to be a party with belief, a party with values and principles that we can support, we, the British electorate, can get behind.
Thank you. Nana?
Well, I just heard what Marco said about he lost 9,500 votes to Reform. And I think part of this, you need to get away from that narrative of that sort of wording, because you didn't lose 9,500 votes to Reform, you lost 9,500 votes. And where those votes went, maybe some went to Reform, maybe some people even went to the Labour Party, but they're regretting that now. You know, those, and I hear this so much from Conservative MPs who maybe have lost their seat or, oh, we lost to Reform. No, you didn't. You didn't. People just were not prepared to vote for you. Wherever their vote went, that narrative needs to stop. That narrative needs to stop. And also, Annunziata, you talk about that it's not unity and that unity isn't the thing. I mean, we've all watched The Apprentice, right? You see a load of people just starting to infight, and in your minds as you're watching it, you think, oh, for goodness sake, the name of the game is to win. So if you all unite, you will win, and nobody will be going home. Nobody gets fired. But for some reason or other, the Conservative Party decided to fight amongst themselves. And I think that means that the British public don't know whether they can trust them again not to do that, not to disseminate into this disunited, disjointed, almost as though they were envious of their leader, mob. I mean, the attack on Boris Johnson was unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it. Within the Conservative Party itself, they were trying to change the rules so that he couldn't get away with anything. And yet, if you look at the Labour Party now, well, it seems that they're already, in my view, a lot worse. I mean, Keir Starmer got away with Beergate. I don't know how. There was some mystery ginger-haired woman in the room, but you didn't know who it was, and she might not have been there. Angela Rayner, a force of nature. I've met her. She walks into the room ignites. You know she's in it. There's no way you could miss Angela Rayner. I mean, she's brilliant in her own way. I don't agree with the word she says, by the way, but she is brilliant in her own way. But she's not someone you could miss. A memo that was impromptu. They called it an impromptu gathering, yet a memo emerged. 6 people, yet there was so much food there when the receipt and the bill emerged that there's no way only 6 people could have eaten that. So the Labour Party are disseminating into a mess, and there's an opportunity for the Conservative Party. But the problem I believe that the Conservative Party have is that they showed such disunity that the British public don't know whether they can trust them again. And that, I think, will be what they really need to overcome. They need to get the trust of the British public, and that will come with them showing us that they can be united for a decent period of time without this arguing and infighting and division and blaming others for their own incompetence.
Thank you. Marco?
Well, I don't disagree really with anything. I think what Annunziata and really Nana have been saying, perhaps more eloquently than myself, is that the problem is within. I think this is how I started my own words to you today, and this is what we need to absolutely address, and it's going to be an uphill battle. So this conference is surprisingly cheerful and optimistic, and I think that is on the back of people realizing that, you know, what the Labour Party is, and what, you know, we have come here thinking, oh yes, we shall be back, and we shall be back very, very soon. But we still have a problem to solve, and I'm sorry to be, you know, putting a dampener on things in that respect. Please don't shoot the messenger. We have to absolutely resolve what is happening inside our party, and I have to tell you, of the 120 odd MPs left, probably 20 or so are of this brand, if I could say, and the other 100 are not. I'm afraid those who are more intent of thinking that they know better rather than representing the view of the people that put them there in the first place. And I'm really sorry to say that, but I think this is something that a future leader needs to show strength. And Boris did show that strength, I don't know if you remember, when he removed the whip from certain MPs over Brexit. And it may well even come to that, I do not know. You know, we are only 120, 121, I think, isn't it, Gareth, in Parliament, and if that means that for a period of time perhaps that number reduces because there is a reluctance to unite behind a leader, then maybe that is what needs to happen. We need to show strength and respect of leadership, whoever that leader is, and unite behind the common ground. And I just hope and pray that that is what happens, because it is the future of this great party, the best party I have known across Europe, a party with a history that no other party in the world has. This is what we are talking about. And Nana and Annunziata are both completely correct in making my argument, I suppose, even more explicit in that way.
Thank you, Marco. Gareth.
Okay, well, look, I mean, the government are terrible, and we've already seen it. They're not even 3 months in yet, and everyone, the entire country, can see just how appalling they are. And I'm a lot more optimistic, actually, than Marco just sounded, if you forgive me, Marco, because we're not in 1997. We didn't see mass switching of our voters to Labour. We didn't see that at all. We saw a lot of people leave us, but they didn't go to Labour. Labour got fewer votes in 2024 than they did in 2019 when we won a landslide. So they are there to be taken, but just because they're terrible doesn't necessarily mean the voters are going to come back to us. We need to earn the right for them to come back to us. And I think we need to resist the temptation to think that there's a quick fix or a silver bullet that can do that overnight. And this talk of mergers with reform. I understand why people are saying it, but you don't sidle up to the school playground bully straight after he's broken your nose. Because you're not going to get respect if you do that. You need to smack him back in the mouth. And that's what we need to be doing. Now, the way we do that, I don't mean going punching Nigel. Nigel's one of my constituents, actually, and we get on actually quite well. But we need to earn back the voters that we gave away, that felt betrayed by us. And we need to acknowledge that that might be a long process. Now, we can do that piece by piece by piece. We're talking about elections in 4 or 5 years. I think it'll be 4, actually, because unless Labour are behind in the polls, they won't go 5, they'll go in 4. So we need to be ready in 3.5. There will be a lot of elections between now and then. There will be local elections. There will be mayoral elections. There are plenty of opportunities for us to make our case. So we need to get this leadership election out of the way as fast as possible. Unite behind the leader and the parliamentary party. And I'm not quite as pessimistic about the parliamentary party as Marco sounded just there. Need to make the case for conservatism aggressively, optimistically, relentlessly. Because I think if we do that, these voters are there. They want to return to the fold. Nobody voted for reform with a spring in their step. They voted for reform because they were feeling depressed, disillusioned, angry, betrayed. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that hard truth and do something about it. And the way to do something about that is to return back to what we are, which is conservatives. And I think if we do that, then we can recapture the country. It may take a bit longer than 4 or 5 years. We might have to acknowledge that as well. It might take 2 elections. But it can be done. This government are appalling. Nobody wants this government. So let's earn the voters back and let's get rid of them.
Thank you, Gareth. Right, I'm now going to throw open to the audience, and okay, right, lots of hands have gone up already, so we've got 2 microphones going around. I'm going to ask, considering the number of people with hands up, that you keep your questions to 1 sentence or less. And so I think, Chris, if we come down the front here, I'll take them in geographically close sets, so if we could do the 2 gentlemen in the front row and the lady right behind in the second row. And if you could please introduce yourself before asking your question.
So, Philip Spicer. So, the media killed the Conservatives because we didn't deliver for the public. How are we going to change that? That is the bit what killed us.
Thank you.
Leadership is critical. You blew it in 2019.
Sorry, could you introduce yourself, please?
Damien Chunalel, Kensington and Bayswater.
Thank you.
You blew it in 2019, despite having a big majority, etc., etc. The question you have to ask is, why did that happen? Why is it going to be different this time? Because every single panel says exactly the same thing, but why is it going to be different this time, having failed so badly last time? And the last question you may or may not wish to answer is, which of the 4 is going to give you the greatest confidence that you can reunite your right?
Thank you. And the lady just behind you.
Anne-Marie Cooper, Melksham Devises. I've liked a lot about what I've heard from the panel today, but I would go a bit further, and I have a lot of respect for the leaders of the Reform Party. I believe they have stolen the agenda of the Conservative Party, and I don't criticise them for that. I don't understand why we are still... What is special about the Conservative Party? Like Nana, I voted for a lot of people. I have been a member since 2019 with enthusiasm. I've been to sessions about values. Why can't we open our arms and look for the merits of reform, bring in that talent, lose male egos or female egos or whatever egos are there, and trying to bring... It's not about winning back, it's about joining together. It might not happen straight away. I don't understand why the leadership contest is not saying that more clearly. It's ridiculous. It's playground activity.
Thank you very much. So I think I'll start from the right this time. So we've got a question on the media, how do we win the media battle, a question on leadership, and any of you who, we've had 1 declaration of support already. If any of you fancy declaring your support for any of the candidates, go ahead, and why is it different this time? Why will it be different this time? And finally, Anne-Marie, about whether or not we should accept welcome reformers back and how we can use their talents. Gareth, would you like to kick us off?
Okay, Philip's question about the media killed us. The way to deal with the media, because I'm inclined to agree, I think the media does have its own narrative. And it does tend to be, I'm afraid to say, it's become a bit of a gotcha type media now that is constantly looking for soap operisation of politics and scandal and everything else. Face them down is the answer. Don't be afraid to take on a journalist in a broadcast interview or indeed in writing. Too often, in the last 5 years, we've been almost apologetic about being conservative. I said it in my opening remarks. We start using the language of the left all the time. We talk about investing rather than what we mean is spending. Every government press release that went out for the whole of my time in Parliament told you how much money we were spending on something to demonstrate that we cared about it. And you think, but we'd never talked about outcomes. We didn't talk about what this money went on and why spending money was good, or in some cases bad. So I think taking the media on, being prepared to be confrontational, being prepared to stand our ground, as long as we're doing it from a basis of principle, as long as we know what we stand for and why, then I think that we can win those arguments. The next question was about leadership, and was it Damien? Did I get the name right? Why did we blow it in 2019? Well, I think the circumstances of the last Parliament were pretty unique. I mean, I waited a long time to become a member of Parliament, and I certainly didn't imagine that in my first 5 years I'd have 3 different prime ministers, 2 monarchs, a worldwide plague, and rampant inflation and a war in Europe. It was a very difficult 5 years. And I think because of the circumstances of that, some adverse polling started to come out. Partygate didn't help. There were a number of things that happened before Partygate. I'll be honest, I don't think Boris looked after his MPs in the way that he could have done. He could have avoided some of the trouble that came his way because he didn't do enough to look after his members of Parliament. And that led to some of them deserting him. They started to panic when the polls started to move against us, and as I said earlier in my opening remarks as well, they decided the answer was to get rid of the leader who'd won us the biggest majority we'd had since the 1980s. I think that was a fatal mistake, and it led to major problems. So which of the four? Well, I'm wearing the lanyard which tells you which way I'm going on that one. The reason why I'm backing Kemi is because I think that Kemi is, all four candidates I should say, I think have various merits. I know all of them very well, and they're all good people. I think Kemi best encapsulates the robust, unapologetic, optimistic, forward-looking conservatism, unapologetic conservatism that I want to see from the leader of the Conservative Party, because all the way through this meeting I've talked about the need to be proud of who we are, to be principled about being Conservative, to take it on the front foot. And of the four candidates, I think Kemi best encapsulates that. There'll be a range of opinions on the panel, and I think that that's fine. We live in a democracy after all. The final question about reform and bringing reform into the party, losing egos. I'll turn that around a little bit, because whilst I do have a lot of time for Nigel Farage, the reason why, as Sam said in our opening remarks, that we have 100 fewer MPs than we would otherwise have done, even in defeat, is because of the ego of Nigel Farage. Nigel could easily have joined the Conservative Party once Brexit had been done in 2019. He could have become a Conservative Member of Parliament. But had he tried to do that, he would have had to do that in a much more anonymised way than he has become used to. Nigel likes the limelight. He likes to be in the media. He likes to set the agenda. And he can do that on the platform that he now has. Joining with the Conservative Party would mean that he would have to rein himself in a little bit and work collaboratively. And I'm not sure that he is prepared to do that. Now, it's not about Nigel. It's about the people that voted for reform, of whom there are millions. And they voted for reform because they lost patience with us. And I repeat what I said earlier on. Our job, our duty, is to recover those people, and we can only do that by being Conservatives and meaning it, and repeating that endlessly and demonstrating that we believe what we say.
Thank you. I might have to ask you to remind me the order of the questions. I think the first one was around delivery.
Media. Oh. Talking about the media.
Media or delivery, was it?
Yeah,
media killing us.
Media.
Media killing us. Yes. Well, I think we have become accustomed to a media whose broadcasters see themselves as celebrities, and of course.
What? Hello.
But
I don't see myself as a celebrity.
I hadn't quite finished. But thank God for GB News. But it tells you something about how bad the Labour Party are. If even the likes of Laura Kuenssberg and other broadcasters are really now having a go at Labour and Starmer and Rayner, etc. They are still rooted in centre-left thinking, to say the least. So I repeat again, thank God for GB News. How do we win the media? By being honest, by being straight-talking. Lee Anderson is a great friend of mine, and I absolutely did everything to keep him within the Conservative Party, but we were just too arrogant. And this is, again, another example of how we thought best, didn't we? And I absolutely know Lee to be a Conservative in his heart. So, look, how do we win the media? We are going to find it more difficult in opposition, because how do you prove delivery in opposition? Someone did use the word delivery earlier. How do you show trust again when you're in opposition, when you can't actually deliver, which then shows that you are starting to gain that trust back? So we have a journey. We have a mountain to climb. But I am confident that under the right leader, that we shall do that. And as Gareth said, all four candidates have their merits. I did in fact support originally Kemi in the post-Boris scenario, but I have been much warmer to Robert Jenrick because of his unequivocal position on ECHR and immigration being the one thing that really underpins and gives oxygen to Nigel and to reform. What was the other point? So
about whether or not we should accept reformers in Nigel.
I think the country is ready for us to have a grown-up politics. I think if we were to just completely say, oh no, we're not talking to Reform, we are the Conservative Party, just shows how arrogant we are again. I think there should be a conversation with Reform if those parties are willing to have that conversation. But ultimately what we should be there for is the people. I've always been an admirer of Nigel. I think Nigel should have been given far more credit for what he managed to deliver as an individual and as a politician than he ever was given credit for in his delivery of Brexit. And I respect the man very much. I do very much find myself very disappointed in Nigel in how he conducted himself with this last election, because what do we all know Nigel for? How do we know him? We know him for Brexit, don't we? He knew full well that what he was doing was handing the Labour Party, probably the worst Labour Party we've ever known, such a huge majority, and therefore Brexit as well. So now I have to question his utter commitment to Brexit.
Yeah.
He could have looked at a whole raft of Conservative MPs, which he could have said, we know Marco, we know so-and-so, we know Brendan Clark-Smith, we know Nick Fletcher, we know Gareth, we know so many. They speak our language. Nigel then would have become an MP, and he would have had actually a lot of friends in Parliament. How many MPs do they have now? They have 5. They say they want their country back. Well, so do I.
Right.
How are 5 MPs going to get their country back? They're not. There are over 400 Labour MPs. So it is going to be a coalition around that common ground, and I truly hope that we are all grown up enough that we all put our egos aside. We put our arrogance to one side. Nigel managed to put his ego to one side for the common good.
Well said, Mark.
Thank you, Marco.
Was there another question?
No, that was it.
Was there? Oh, sorry.
was it.
Thank you.
No.
That's good.
All right, so I'm going to go backwards because I'm going to start with the ego comments. So again, I just really wish that you could sort of slightly hear yourself again blaming somebody else. So we had blaming Nigel's ego. Gareth, you blamed Nigel's ego for Reform's failure, for the Conservatives' failure, and Marco, you just blamed Nigel for handing the Labour Party the biggest majority that it's ever had.
Oh, Brexit. It was about Brexit.
This is about Brexit. Okay. But I don't think that, again, that anyone should be blaming anyone. I think the Conservative Party really need to look into themselves. I don't think the Conservative Party even need the Reform vote, actually, if they just did what they said they would do on the tin. But there is actually room for 3 parties anyway. And you never know. In the next election, it might end up that Reform and the Conservative parties will have to unite to create a majority. So you might not have a choice in it, because the British public may divide the right, but then the left will be so small that if the right unite, then the right could lead. So that's my thoughts on that. With regards to the media are very left-wing. I used to work for the BBC. They trained me in many ways, and I'm very grateful for that. But after I got my training and worked with them, and in total my period of time with them was up 13 years, I left because, well, I just couldn't say anything really. I wanted to question climate change, and I couldn't, because I knew I'd be out of a job if I did. And I did not support Black Lives Matter at all. I thought they were a far-left Marxist pressure group, and when my boss at the BBC asked me to promote an event that Black Lives Matter were having, I sent him an email saying, I didn't think you were allowed to do that, promoting far-left Marxist pressure groups who are corrupt. So I left shortly after that, and thank God GB News was there. I wrote to GB News and said, give me a job. They hadn't started, but I knew what they were about, and I was ready. I wanted to speak my mind. Not all black people think exactly the same thing. We are not the same person. We have had different upbringings. In Africa, Africa itself is divided with different communities, just like the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, and the people from Ireland, and Northern Ireland, and Southern Ireland, and, you know. So just because we're black doesn't mean we all think the same. And this was the narrative that was being purported by the media, as it were. So I'm glad to be out there to speak for myself as an individual. But the media, did, I think, affect the Conservative Party, but the Conservative Party made it easy for the media to affect them. And the reason they made it easy is because once they had decided that they were all going to attack Boris, those in the Conservative Party then got scared and thought, oh, I've got to go, I better attack Boris, without thinking that actually if I attack Boris, then perhaps I could be next. And unfortunately, that's where it went. And there was no credible alternative either. So that was a problem. As we see now with the leadership race, the candidates, whilst they all seem very lovely, none of them are a patch on the charisma and energy and enthusiasm and leadership, just energy that Boris Johnson had. I'm sorry to say that none of them have it. And so now we're picking through 4 potential candidates. I don't know which one I'd pick. It to be between Kemi and Robert Jenrick, because the other 2 are left-wing as far as I'm concerned. But, you know, have I missed anything? What was the last thing?
No, that's all 3.
That's it. All right, that's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Annunziata.
Nana, I think you said it brilliantly on the BBC, and I think they're here.
Yeah, they are. Hi.
And I didn't ever work for them, but I did occasionally do a stint reviewing their newspapers on BBC News. And I can remember being in a lift when Boris Johnson was first elected as mayor. And someone who was behind the scenes and not very senior got in the lift with me. And he said, please don't tell anyone, but I voted Boris. I'll be fired if they know. That should not be what we hold up as our national broadcaster. I know they're here, but I will not take it back. I think they need to know how much they are distrusted, how much they are seen as biased. Nana's just given her experience. We're the mere watchers. But when we watch, we know. Now, there's been a bit of discussion about egos. There are a lot of egos in politics. Was it Marco who said male or female egos? No, it does genuinely not make any difference. What does matter is that we smash those egos. Politics is never about one individual. It doesn't matter if you're Boris, with the charisma that could fill this room 100 times over, or whether you're Theresa May, who could, do John Major disservice. I mean, What matters is the British people. What matters is our country. What matters is our economy, the pounds in our pockets, that we have the freedom to be who we need to be who we are. Those egos do need bringing down a peg or two. I mentioned earlier, I used to work for Nigel. He is genuinely a very nice man. But when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, I had to leave the Brexit Party. Did I think that Boris's deal was perfect? No. Was it a hell of a lot better than anything else Keir Starmer was going to let us have? Whilst he went through every judge in the country, whilst he went to international courts of law, whilst he tried to do everything he could to stop us having Brexit at all? Yes. There was no way we were going to get better. And if you can't get better, don't get nothing. What did Nigel do? He stood down his candidates against sitting MPs. Well, there are probably two people on this panel who will tell you that was moronic. Because half their colleagues, I slightly dispute that it's 100 wets to 20. I've done the maths myself. I think it's about 2/3, 3/4 maybe, on a bad day. Nigel stood against them. Great. But he stood against very good people. He stood against candidates we should have got in, that we didn't get in 2019. I can name you Emily Barley. She used to run the Freedom event at Tory party conference. She is as good a Conservative as you will ever find, and she lost her seat by a hell of a lot less than Labour took. Than Reform took. Brexit Party. That's what they were called back then. They do change their name. I'm wearing their colour by mistake. It's a good colour. In 2024, they did the same scattergun. They stood against brilliant people who didn't deserve to lose, who would have supported 99% of their own agenda in the same way and put the same effort in that they did to people I doubt anyone in this room counts as Conservative. There is nothing more to it than ego. Richard Tice is my local MP. I didn't vote for him. I don't think I'd be allowed on this panel if I sat here, or at least to work for something called popular conservatism, if I had voted for him. Why not? Because they're not actually Conservative. It is the big deceit. It is about power. It is about being popular, not about what you believe in, and that's where we can differentiate. We're talking about the media. We've lost the narrative. Labour has taken over our language, or the left has taken over our language. Are you far right? Because apparently, if you think anything mildly conservative, if you think immigration is too high, you are far right. Well, that's what we're told by the press, and it's not true. Politics has shifted to the left. We started it under Tony Blair, who pretended to move to the right to take his party with him. David Cameron followed suit. He took our party and our country's politics to the left. And now, being what we have always been, believing in free markets, believing in a small state, is called right-wing. We need to regain the narrative that the media will write. And I say that as a reformed journalist.
Thank you, Annunziata. Unfortunately, we are out of time for taking any more questions, but Marco has requested the opportunity to just come back on what you said, what you were saying about ego. So, Marco.
I think Nana is quite right to point out, again, something that I actually opened up my conversation with you with, which is the problem lies within the Conservative Party. I have been unequivocal about that, unashamedly about that, and I started out by saying we should offer an apology to the nation. But to argue somehow that Nigel doesn't have an ego,
I didn't say that.
or to argue that perhaps I would be blaming Nigel for his ego, that wasn't the case. I was merely making the point that something we all know Nigel about, which was about Brexit, and for him to have fought all his life to achieve Brexit, something that I said he should have been recognised for him to then think that what he was doing was effectively handing Brexit back to the socialist Labour Party that we have now, somehow that is something I find unreconcilable. And whether perhaps I was a little clumsy in how I said it, I didn't think I was.
Well, I wrote
that is the only thing. This isn't about passing the blame on. I wasn't passing the blame on at all.
No, it wasn't that bit.
I think our loss is purely the Conservative Party's fault. Let me be absolutely clear about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, and maybe you guys can carry this fight
we
on
will.
post the event. So thank you very much all for coming. A couple of notes before we go, and I want to leave you with one, I think, hopefully one piece of hopeful information. So as most of you can probably tell, I'm not British naturally. I was born in New Zealand, and in New Zealand in 2020, the New Zealand National Party, of which I stood back in 2011, we'd replaced the leader twice during the previous term. And we plummeted from about, I think, 38% to 24%. We had a growing party on our right, and yet 3 years later, and of course we were up against a Labour government. Jacinta Ardern, some of you may have heard of her. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of sad nods. Just a party led by Jacinta Ardern that scored the greatest number of seats that any party had scored since New Zealand had proportional representation. And yet 3 years later, the National Party had almost doubled its vote and we were back in power. And I think we all on the panel believe that hopefully the Conservative Party can do it again. So thank you very much all for coming. For those of you who, like Marco, are concerned about parliamentary sovereignty, you might be interested to come and listen to Dr. David Starkey this afternoon from 4:30 till 5:30. And if you'd like to, stick around and think tank for the next event, the Taxpayers Alliance Lost Liberty, Why Don't the Conservatives Trust People? Which I think is also quite an interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I get a picture?